young people. Jade Ellis is our first up. She's going to sing her own song for you shortly. And how lovely it was to have that beautiful voice for the duration. She did that so, out off the cuff. I think she's amazing. So we'll get back to Jade in a moment. We have a recorded video of Greta Thunberg for a few minutes, and then we go to the older generation, Barrry Jones, after whom we hear from our candidates, and there's a panel question time till about 5 to 9. From 9 o'clock to 9:30, for those of you who want to stay, we have making the chandelier room available for those who want to meet the candidates and talk with them further, and we'll pull the chairs back so that there's plenty of space there. And there will be 2 stalls in the foyer as you leave, which will have material for you from the Kooyong Votes Climate campaign, so you can pick that up if you would like to as well. But tonight, we start the night with music. We've had a taste, and now we're going to have Jade Ellis. She is a singer-songwriter who sang her songs for us when we entered today. She's a graduate of the Victorian College of the Arts. She's won several songwriting competitions, and her song Be Still was recently shortlisted in the top 11 of Australia's songs for the Eurovision Song Contest. Her passion for the planet filters through her writing and has brought her to perform at various fundraisers for organisations like Oxfam and Wilderness Society. Jade Ellis is one of the reasons I am here today, organising this sort of event. She is the future we are fighting for. She is my granddaughter. Can I welcome Jade Ellis?
Thank you, Grandma Carolyn. So this song I wrote when I was 12 years old, which is the age of a lot of the young strikers out there today. And how sad to see that the words are just as relevant to today as a decade ago. So this is a song called Beautiful Earth.
Why
you.
Our next little item is related to the starter of a movement. Her name is Greta Thunberg. On the 20th of August 2018, when she was back in grade 9, she decided not to attend school until the Swedish general election on the 9th of September, and after the heat waves and the wildfires in Sweden. Her demands were that the Swedish government reduce carbon emissions in accordance with the Paris Agreement. Not a lot to ask. And she protested by sitting outside the Reichstag every day during school hours with the sign, "Strike has a climate strike for climate." School strike for climate. After the general election, she continued to strike, only on Fridays, gaining worldwide recognition and attention. She inspired school students across the globe to take part in student strikes. So the video you're going to see today was recorded in the last couple of weeks after receiving a Golden Camera Award in Berlin, a sort of Hollywood-style thing. And although it may not seem like it, Greta has Asperger's disease.
I want to dedicate this prize to those protecting the Hambach forests and to the climate activists who fight to keep the fossil fuels in the ground everywhere. We live in a strange world where the United Science tells us that we are about 11 years away from setting off an irreversible chain reaction way beyond human control that will probably be the end of our civilization as we know it. We live in a strange world where children must sacrifice their education in order to protest against the destruction of their future. Where the people who have contributed the least to this crisis are the ones who are going to be affected the most. Where politicians say it's too expensive to save the world while spending trillions of euros subsidizing fossil fuels. We live in a strange world where no one dares to look beyond our current political systems, even though it's clear that the answers we seek will not be found within the politics of today. Where some people seem to be more concerned about the presence in school of some children than the future of humankind. Where everyone can choose their own reality and buy their own truth. Where our survival is depending on a small, rapidly disappearing carbon budget, and hardly anyone even knows it exists. Where we think we can buy and build our way out of a crisis that has been created by buying and building stuff. Where a football game or a film gala gets more media attention than the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced. Where celebrities, film and pop stars who have stood up against all injustices will not stand up for the environment and for climate justice because that would inflict on their right to fly around the world, visiting their favorite restaurants, beaches and yoga retreats. Avoiding catastrophic climate breakdown is to do the seemingly impossible. And yet that is what we have to do. But here's the truth. We can't do it without you in the audience here tonight. People see you celebrities as gods. You influence billions of people. We need you. You can use your voice to raise awareness about this global crisis. You can help turn individuals into movements. You can help us wake up the leaders and let them know that our house is on fire. We live in a strange world. But it's the world that my generation has been handed. It's the only world we've got. We are now standing at a crossroads in history. We are failing, but we have not yet failed. There is still time to fix this. It's up to us. Thank you.
Greta is only 16 years old, but she speaks with a straightness and honesty about her own future. Now we are being joined by Facebook Live people outside. They've missed all the best bits, but they're here for the candidates. Oh gosh, who said that? I would like to move on quickly to the next bit, which is Barrry Jones. I'd like to introduce Barrry to you. Barry's bio is unbelievable. I have left out most of it. This is just for him to set the context of the question, is climate change the issue of the moment, that he's going to come and have a few words to us. Barrry Jones AC is an Australian icon who has spent most of his life in the political arena in some way or another, and is also a writer, an academic, as well as a former teacher and lawyer. He was an ALP member of the Victorian Parliament from 72 to 77, then a Commonwealth Parliament from 77 to 98, and he served as Australia's longest-serving science minister from 1983 to 90 under Bob Hawke. He has represented Australia in Paris at UNESCO and on the World Heritage Committee. His book, Sleeper's Wake, was a bestseller and he says is more influential in China than Australia. But this is the bit I really love. He was the first Australian politician to raise the issue of climate change and global warming, and he has been talking and writing about it since 1983. He was a keynote speaker with Al Gore at a conference in London convened by Margaret Thatcher in 1989. Now, that is historic, and it reflects a time when climate change was considered more than just a left issue. Please welcome our living treasure, Barrry Jones.
Well, Carolyn and friends, first of all, I want to begin my remarks with a disclaimer. As you pointed out, I was active as a Labor Member of Parliament. However, I'm not here tonight as a partisan, but as somebody who's been, as you said, speaking and writing about the issue of climate change since 1983, 36 long years ago, when I was Australia's Minister for Science. And I should also disclose that I have a good personal relationship with 3 candidates in Kooyong, and one, of course, is a very close friend, and I've had the opportunity to meet 3 of the other speakers who are with her tonight. So I'm not here as an advocate. It's not for a particular candidate or party, but for the science. My profound concern is that on the complex issue of climate change, global warming, we must begin with the science, then work through to the social, economic and political implications. In my observation, if we start with the politics, then work back to the science, we invariably get it wrong. So in my role tonight as an apolitical guru, I'll attempt to set out the fundamental nature of the climate change global warming challenge. And I thought maybe the best thing to do was to raise a few issues by way of the dreaded dot points. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. Now that was something from the law of the conservation of mass, and that goes back to 1789, time of the French Revolution, and Antoine Lavoisier. He made the point that matter is neither created nor destroyed, that in other words, that coal, after burning, when it turns into CO2, but the total mass of carbon doesn't diminish. It disperses, but the total mass is still there. And it survives in the atmosphere, or really in the biosphere around us, for decades, perhaps even longer. That is, atom for atom, molecule for molecule, it simply stays around. It doesn't go away. And it's a classic illustration, I'd say, of market failure. If you buy something that you use and consume, you then have to dispose of it. In the case of burning a fossil fuel, because it disappears into the atmosphere and you can't see it except as particulate matter, it's a classic area of market failure, because you can't then say, well, I'm going to take a responsibility, I'll pay for its disposal. Only the community has the access to do that. Next, I want to talk about greenhouse gases, to define greenhouse gases. Now, water vapour is by far the largest in volume, but then there's carbon dioxide comes in next, and that has a very significant feedback loop, I mean virtually a catalytic effect with the water vapour itself, so that the water vapour really goes a long way in retaining radiant heat. That's in the thermal infrared range, and it retains it for a very long period. So you've got carbon dioxide, you've got methane, you've got nitrous oxide, alias laughing gas, but it's very significant as a greenhouse gas, and ozone. And these gases absorb and emit radiation. Now, human activity makes a very significant contribution to the production of CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. Now, the story of the greenhouse gases is not all bad. We depend on greenhouse gases as a blanket to keep the Earth warm. Otherwise, we'd be too far away from the sun to sustain human life. Mean temperature on Earth is currently 15 degrees Celsius. Without greenhouse gases, mean temperatures would be minus 18 degrees Celsius. As I say, not enough to support life. Now, the science in this area is pretty robust. It was virtually settled in the 19th century. From Fourier in 1824, the very interesting American woman Foote in 1856, Tyndall 1859, Arrhenius 1896. So we know a good deal about the operation of greenhouse gases. The significant thing is the threat to equilibrium. I mean, over an enormously long historic period, we've been used to the idea, and we learnt it at school when we used to learn about transpiration, that there was a rough equivalence between the production of CO2 and its absorption through trees, absorption through forests, absorption through vegetation. The problem is that we've now reached the stage where the equilibrium is seriously under threat. And you don't have to get very much off the target, like walking along a tightrope. You only have to have a pretty small deviance if you're on that tightrope, and you can be in very serious trouble. Now, the annual increase of 10 gigatons of CO2, that's an annual increase of 10 gigatons, due to human activity, disturbs that equilibrium between naturally occurring production and absorption of greenhouse gases, in which oceans and forests were sinks. CO2 and some other greenhouse gases stay, as I said, in the atmosphere for decades, perhaps longer, absorbing and retaining more heat from the sun. Methane's got a shorter lifespan but absorbs solar heat many times more effectively than CO2. And we can observe that there are massive retreats in polar ice and glaciers, acidification of the oceans, increasing numbers of extreme weather events, floods, droughts, hurricanes, and cyclones. So the medium to long-term risks seem to be disturbing. The thawing of the Siberian tundra would release vast amount of methane if it happens, far more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2. If significant areas of the Antarctic ice shelf and Greenland were to melt, it would lead to significant sea level rise and risk the drowning of major urban coastal cities and towns. On this question of equilibrium, it's worthwhile pointing out that in the case of CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, you remember the controversy years ago, in fact in the 1980s, when there was concern that the chlorofluorocarbons, although their proportion in the atmosphere is minuscule compared to coal, absolutely minuscule. Nevertheless, there was an agreement on both from industry and from science that those chlorofluorocarbons were having a major effect on opening up the hole in the ozone layer. And curiously, the matter passed without controversy because industry said, well, that's all right, we'll convert from CFCs to HFCs, to hydrofluorocarbons, which didn't have that effect. And so the result is there's never been a controversy so far as the role of CFCs has been concerned, because the industry said, right, we'll make the adaptation. But in the case of, say, the producers of coal and oil, fossil fuels generally, it's not as if they say, well, we've got an alternative product that we can turn to. We've got to look at the issue of climate change in the context of population. Now, the world population currently is just on 7.7 billion in very big cities, which are dependent on increasing, indeed exponentially increasing use of fossil fuels. The projection for population in 2050 is 9.8 billion. Now, next, there's what I've called the 7 C words. There are 7 C words that are absolutely critical to our discussion about climate change and how it operates. And those words are coal, cities, cars, cement, consumption, conservation, contraception. Oh, and I've left one out, cows. No, if you added it, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Scrub that, make it 8 C words. Cow, because cows, of course, are prodigious producers of methane. Now, each of these factors, even contraception, determines population the rates of population increase through natural increase. That's an important factor. Our cities tend to be, person for person, far more prodigal in the consumption of fossil fuels than, say, rural areas are, although the rural areas and the smaller towns do make their own specialist contribution, particularly with where methane is concerned. Now, all these factors are central to our lifestyle, and each is interrelated and dependent on high and rising levels of consumption, and they contribute to what are quite often called wicked problems, in which there'll be victims if we take action, and there'll be more victims if we don't take action. But it's not as if you say, well, there's an easy formula, and we can simply apply it, and everyone will agree without difficulty. So we have to evaluate risk prudentially, even where outcomes are uncertain, as we do all the time in our lives with insurance, creating fire brigades, life-saving services, emergency services, and the like. Human factors. The human factors most contributing to climate change is that burning fuel combines with oxygen in the atmosphere, the biosphere in particular. 1 tonne of coal produces 3.67 tonnes of CO2. Petrol, 1 tonne of petrol produces 2.2 tonnes of CO2. Natural gas, methane, more complicated chemical reaction, 1 tonne of natural gas produces 1.9 tonnes of CO2. So to repeat, use of fossil fuels in transport, massive land clearing, increased population, longevity, urbanisation, and per capita resource use are also major contributors. And the abundance and cheapness of coal, of course, exacerbates the problem. And then I hope it'll be up there on the screen. Maybe, oh yes, there you are. It's simply that if you look at the rising temperatures, you can see, of course, that there's a difference between summer and winter, difference between the seasons. So it's not as if it's a single linear shape. It goes up and down, but you can see where the trend line in red goes up. And the very last chart that I have, and I hope that'll work out. You may find some difficulty in reading that, but that's really an indication about CO2 levels, that there's a baseline there and it would go up and down. This is over a very long period. And then in recent decades, you've had an exponential increase. So these are the issues that you have to think about. This is where you'd have to say that our major scientific organisations, our universities and so on, both here and over the worldwide, I'd say I wouldn't use the word consensus. I'd say there's a convergence of the examination of data, and they reach a similar conclusion. In other words, that we have to act prudentially. We might be lucky, like an idiot winning the lottery, but on the other hand, we have to recognise that the risk is serious, and we have to take prudential steps to minimise the impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry, for that amazing summary of the whole story of climate change and where we're at today. Fantastic. Indeed. We'll put that sort of stuff on our website too for you. I now have the privilege of introducing the moderator for the evening. Victoria McKenzie-McHarg is the chair of the Climate Action Network of Australia, CANA, an advisory board member of Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute at the University of Melbourne, and the manager of strategy and planning at a sustainable customer-owned bank. Over the past 10 years, Victoria has led national community campaigns for government action on climate change. At CANA, Victoria leads a coordinated approach to building a powerful, strategic and diverse social movement for action on climate change. Victoria chaired our state pre-election forum on climate, Why Should I Care?, here in this hall in Hawthorn. And we felt there would be no better person to moderate this discussion than her. She will introduce our candidates and chair the discussion with Slido questions. So please welcome Victoria McKenzie-McHarg.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And thank you to all of you for being here tonight. It is really, really heartening to see such an enormous turnout, and a big hello to the audience upstairs, in the room, outside, and to those of you who are joining us on Facebook Live. As Carolyn mentioned, I'm the chair of the Climate Action Network of Australia. We bring together organisations from across the environment movement, the social sector, health organisations, faith groups and community groups all over the country who want to work together to find ways to tackle climate change and to shift the public conversation that's happening across the country. I want to acknowledge, though, that with the dozens and dozens of organisations that I have the privilege of working with, there are very, very few with the tenacity and the organising power of Lighter Footprints, who are a phenomenal community climate action group with no funding, who do all of this by volunteer work. So I just want to say an enormous thank you and congratulations to the Lighter Footprints crew. You will get to vote with preferences, and we know in tight elections those preferences really matter. You will get to talk to your friends and your family and your colleagues about what you've heard here tonight and what most intrigued you about what your different candidates have said about their positions and how they will act. You have enormous power to influence people's reaction in this electorate on climate change, so I would ask you to pay attention and to use that power really wisely. I'm going to invite each of the candidates to come up onto the stage. They're going to give a 5-minute presentation. You all heard the bell before. Candidates know what to listen to. You will get a bell when you have 1 minute left. And I've seen these folks in action. They are strict. So I would encourage you to stick to your time. When the candidates are finished, they will take a seat here on the stage, and once we've heard from all of our candidates, I will then have an opportunity to pose questions to them based on the sorts of questions that are coming through from you all here tonight. Thank you once again for joining us, and we will hand over now to the first of our candidates. So I'm pleased to introduce to you Bill Chandler, who is a progressive independent candidate for Kooyong. With his family, he has lived and worked in Kooyong for more than 4 decades. Bill is an active contributor to community life, particularly through the Surrey Hills Neighbourhood Centre and through Lighter Footprints. Recognised nationally as a city planner and urban designer, Bill was awarded an Order of Australia Medal in 2014, and he is focused on sustainability and climate change. Welcome, Bill.
Well, thank you, Victoria. This is the Climate Change Action election. If you're in any doubt, look around you. In conservative Kooyong, more than 600 people saying enough is enough. No more excuses. We need urgent action now. Lighter Footprints, under Carolyn's leadership, goodness me, Carolyn, you're getting the badges tonight, but it's true, has achieved much, including hundreds of letters to the editor, which you would have read, including 70 or so of mine, and you can see those on my website. The message, though, is consistent. Urgent, integrated action on climate change now. Barry, before you were born, 1912, there was a New Zealand paper had an article which said coal consumption is affecting climate. I know you weren't born at that stage. And yet now, in 2019, we still have politicians who are simply saying, no, that's not true, and beholden to big money to make sure it's not true. Well, Adani, need I say any more? My city planning work is underpinned by a clear process. First, understand the issues and what needs to be done, assess the best options, devise a clear plan, and then do it. Nothing too magic about that. For more than a decade, the 4 main parties have failed to achieve the integrated and robust plan needed for investment certainty. Investment for business, for government, and for the community. That's us. The pre-election party rhetoric, quite frankly, is simply too little, too late. And therefore the challenge of real action remains, and that's why I'm standing as an independent. My major aim is to achieve the 1.5 Paris Agreement or below that figure, because that's what the science is now telling us. Recognising the economic, the employment, the environmental and the social benefits for this action, and also the enormous cost of not taking the action. Consider this. Fossil fuel and industrial processes, 64% of the problem. But they're easy to deal with. Stop burning coal and gas. We urgently need to transition to renewables. Low emissions, reliable and affordable. And Josh, you used to actually say that, and I hope you will again tonight. We can use the world's best technology, 21st century technology, and we need to deal with jobs, we need to deal with distribution grids, and we need to deal with how we manage the finances. Transport, 19%. We need to achieve sustainable cities with energy-efficient transport that optimises travel. That simply is jargon for having places close to where you work, to where you live, and making sure that we have good walking, cycling, public transport to deal with those matters. And to have all vehicles, cars and freight, to be electric by 2030. Quite possible. Keep reading the papers. We live in a society, not just an economy. We need to nurture inclusive and compassionate communities which celebrate our diversity through collaboration, recognising the special contribution of Indigenous people, asylum seekers, and those with special needs. They create a lot for us. And lastly, democracy is underpinned by trust and transparency. Misinformation, half-truths and lies have absolutely no place in our democracy. We've been subjected to a lack of transparency about climate change, renewables, job estimates, and Adani, good Lord, particularly this latest water approval. But also, what about the banks, the ABC, asylum seekers, water management, particularly the Murray-Darling Basin? Misleading information at best, lies at worst. Enough is enough. The people of Kooyong and across Australia deserve and demand better from our elected representatives. Let me finish with this. The recent budget speeches barely touched on climate change. Hey, I'm back in black. Take a look at that. Hey, and also, let me give you some money. You probably can't see it there, and I haven't got lots. I don't know how it's going to roll. But let me warn you, these $50 notes have written on them, Global Warming Action Now. So see if you can cash those in. But more seriously, throwing around bags of money, our money, is no answer to the global warming emergency. We need strong advocacy by an independent who understands the urgency and what needs to be done. Greta and the students, our own students, inspired me. I'm personally underwriting my campaign. I have supporters, well, my wife's here and a couple of others, but there are no big backers, and of course I'm happy to have your donations. But much more importantly, and this was already been said, vote wisely. And I'm asking for your first preference. Of course I'm asking for your first preference, but your second preference will also count. Make sure it goes to a candidate who understands climate change and the reason that we're all here tonight. So, vote 1, Bill Chandler for Kooyong. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Our next speaker is Jana Stewart, who is a proud Māti Māti and Wamba Wamba woman. Jana has close familial ties to the traditional owners of the Kooyong area. Jana has spent her working life strongly advocating for children, families and vulnerable groups, including as a family therapist, a university lecturer and a policy expert on Aboriginal affairs and child protection in the Andrews Victorian government. Welcome, Jana.
What an incredible crowd here tonight. Of course, it would be remiss of me not to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of land and pay my deep respects to elders, both past, present and emerging, and what incredible leaders we have already seen tonight. And I want to talk about the history of this country, this great country that goes back more than 200 years, of course, and to say that Aboriginal people, my people, have successfully sustained and nurtured this environment for over 60,000 years. And it's incredible what we've seen happen to it in just over 200. And And it's a part of where my passion comes from, to actually be a part of this climate conversation. Because it's people like my great-grandparents who were at the forefront of fighting for land rights and water rights for Aboriginal people, because they could see what was happening, but also when those rights are handed back to Aboriginal people, we know that they actually take care of the country in the way that it deserves to be taken care of, because it's a part of who we are. And I want to thank Victoria for your kind introduction, of course, and Carolyn for pulling together this incredible event tonight. Thank you so much. Jade, the singer, what a beautiful words. And of course, Greta and her incredible speech as well. I think that there is hope in the young people of our future. And I don't know if I'm still considered young or not. Possibly, I don't know. And we can just get to the point and say that we are absolutely facing a climate emergency. There is no doubt about that. And I want to be really clear that I accept the science of climate change. And I hear the Australian people and the people in this room who really want concrete policies to solve the problem. And while I'm at it, I actually just want to take a moment to acknowledge the many people in this room who have fought many, many years for us to be here tonight and to have this very discussion and to make climate the topic of the election for this year. And I know that it can sometimes be a bit relentless and it can seem like nothing is happening and people aren't listening, but I'm certainly listening to what you've got to say. And I want you to know that with me in this community, you'll have an ally on climate change. And I believe, hopefully if we're elected in May, that I'll be sitting beside a whole lot of other allies in government who agree that climate change is real. And we know what we need and what you want is a government who will act. And Labor will act. If elected, we'll implement a range of policies across energy generation, heavy manufacturing, vehicle emissions, and land use to put Australia on the path to be net carbon neutral by 2050. We will cut pollution by 45% by 2030 by extending Turnbull's safeguard mechanism so that it covers the top 250 companies. We will reduce emissions from energy generation by transitioning to 50% renewables by 2030. We will reduce vehicle emissions by introducing strong emission standards and ensuring that 50% of new cars sold by 2030 are electric vehicles. And it seems that we do have some bipartisan agreement on that, I think, even though there's some disagreement, possibly, amongst the party, our current government. And we will address pollution on the land by reforming the Carbon Farming Initiative and put protections in place to stop broad-scale land clearing in states that lack the necessary laws. Finally, but most importantly, we propose an orderly transition for communities and workers. And you will have heard this a lot from Labor talking about a just transition. And it's incredibly important because we need to make sure that we look after the workers who have kept our lights on and they transition into industries where they can continue to keep our lights on, but hopefully in a renewable future. Thank you. That seems really quick. And one of the ways that we'll do that is by establishing an independent Just Transition Authority. So carbon pollution cut by 45% by 2030, 50% renewables by 2030, 50% of new car sales to be electric vehicles by 2030, stopping broad-based land clearing and a just transition. These and others are policies that will put Australia on the path to achieving our net carbon neutral by 2050. And I think there's a lot of people wondering if we can do it. And I think that if we look at Labor's record in this area, we've had a history of actually making some change here. Under the previous Labor government, we saw emissions were going down. And under the current government, emissions are going up. Oh, yep, I've only got a couple of sentences to go, I promise. Under previous Labor governments, we worked across Parliament to pass good climate legislation, including the creation of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. Under this government, their own party room would agree to Josh's National Energy Guarantee. Kooyong residents expect their local member to say what they will do and then do what they'll say, if I quote the great man Dan Andrews himself. And Labor is the only party that's united in acknowledging that climate change is a real threat to our country. And we have the policies that can actually make a real change, and we can form government so we can actually deliver on those policies, and I think that is a real difference. So by finishing, I'm Jana Stewart, I'm the Labor candidate for Kooyong, and if you care about practical solutions to address climate change, then I'm asking for your vote on May 18. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. Our next candidate is Julian Burnside, who has lived in the electorate of Kooyong his entire life. He is most well known for his work as a barrister, as well as a human rights advocate and author. Julian has provided pro bono legal counsel in a wide variety of human rights cases. In 2009, he was made an Officer of the Order of Australia for service as a human rights advocate, particularly for refugees and asylum seekers, to the arts as a patron and fundraiser, and to the law. Julian cites our climate emergency as a core reason for his decision to stand for Parliament at this crucial time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Victoria. I also would like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and that land was never ceded, it was stolen from them. And I also, like Jana, respect the enormous importance of their custodianship of caring for this land. We should all understand how much they understand about how you keep the land the way it ought to be. Now, most people in this hall know me for my efforts in defending the human rights of asylum seekers. Right now, however, I face what I regard as the greatest human rights challenge ever to face the human race. We are in a climate emergency, and the real question is whether we can survive as a species. The IPCC, in its latest report last year, gave us until 2030 to take serious steps to combat climate change, or else it will be too late. Now, I'm sorry if my tone sounds distressed, but I am distressed. The Australian government's lack of action in relation to climate change has driven me, against all my previous instincts, to put my hand up to stand for Parliament, something I said I'd never do, because I wanted to be a candidate to stand for the only party in this country which has got a genuine plan to deal with climate change, and that's the Greens. Now, you don't need to be a scientist to understand that there's already too much carbon pollution in the atmosphere. We've got a record a series of hot summers, bushfires, floods, extinctions, extreme droughts, heat waves, and so on. Everyone knows it. And yet the current government has chosen to do nothing at all about it. Now, Barrry Jones gave a perfect summary of the mechanism and of the fact that we've known about this for a long time, from Joseph Fourier's groundbreaking work in the 1820s to Eunice Foote and John Tyndall in the 1850s and Svante Arrhenius in the 1890s. We have known about this for more than 1.5 centuries, and we've done nothing. So you'll excuse me if I'm upset, but I imagine I'm not the only person in this hall who is upset about what is going on, and more particularly what is not going on. Unfortunately, it's not only the Liberal Party who have failed to do anything. the Labor Party has also failed to do anything, and it may have something to do with the fact that both major parties receive very large donations from the fossil fuel industry. Since 2012, they have, between them, received over $8 million. Hey, that really would be something to write home about, wouldn't it? They've received over $8 million in donations from the fossil fuel industry. That's one reason, perhaps, why they don't listen all that attentively to simple people like us who are just worried about whether our children and grandchildren will have a world in which human beings can survive. Now, big donations lead to big influence. The fact is that instead of managing a transition away from mining, exporting and burning coal, they're backing it. Now, coal is the major source of carbon pollution and therefore a major driver of climate change. And if you don't have a plan to phase out coal, you don't have a plan to deal with climate change. The Greens have got a comprehensive and independently costed plan called Renew Australia. Have a look at that. And it's pretty good. The plan is to get Australia to 100% renewables by 2030, and that means that we will be able to move quickly to zero emissions once you take into account 100% sale of electric vehicles, new electric vehicles by 2030, so that no new petrol-driven or internal combustion engine vehicles would be sold after 2030. All of that means that the two major sources of climate change will be defeated quickly, and quickly enough, we would hope that the situation will not become beyond control, as the IPCC have warned. And one of the parts of this plan, which is independently costed, is that it will create 180,000 new jobs and will also introduce a carbon price so that the people who are polluting the planet will have to pay the price, and their carbon price will fund a substantial part of the plan. In addition, the Greens have got a plan to protect nature's natural carbon sink, that Barry pointed out, which is by ending the logging of native forests and land clearing. Victoria's native forests are amongst the most carbon-rich, carbon-dense in the world, but they are being logged at the rate of 5 mcgs per day. That's the rate at which... Now, that's an ecological catastrophe. And it's supported by the Liberals at federal level and by Labor at state level. Yeah, I'll be just a moment. She's like a special leave application in the High Court. The Liberals will tell you that the Greens' plan is impossible. It's not impossible, it is ambitious. But we need ambition right now. We need an ambition that this planet can remain a place where human beings can survive. Now, I only met Josh Frydenberg for the first time tonight. Everything I've heard of him is he's a good bloke. And the difficulty is he's standing for a party that has done absolutely nothing when it should have done a great deal to save the human species. His party voted to slash the renewable energy target, to scrap the carbon price, and as Environment Minister, he supervised the increase in emissions between 2013 and 2019. 2 days ago, his party okayed Adani's plans for a new mine in Queensland. What more do you need to know? So, okay, thanks, Caroline. For the first time in history, this seat of Kooyong is at the centre of a plan to help save the planet. Make sure and come with the Greens.
Our next candidate is Oliver Yates, who is an experienced global banking and finance executive with a focus on climate change and renewable energy. He was the inaugural head of the $10 billion Clean Energy Finance Corporation. Oliver has worked around Australia and the world on renewable energy projects, spent 2 decades at Macquarie Bank, and led reforestation projects in Borneo. He has lived in Kooyong for the past 7 years, has 3 children and a dog named Peanut. Welcome, Oliver.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. The last time I addressed many of you was actually before the Victorian state election. And at that time, our community sent a very clear message to the Liberals from us right here. But that message has been completely ignored at a federal level. So tonight, we have a time to send, and an opportunity to send the message again. And this time, if I'm successful, I hope to deliver that message in Parliament with your voice in Canberra. We want action on climate change, and we want it now. So today's topic is climate change, the issue of the moment. And despite very convincing and compelling utterances from the previous speakers, actually the answer is no. The issue of the moment is frankly integrity. That's the issue. Integrity, being honest, and having moral principles. Now, if your politicians don't have integrity, they can't implement policies to address climate change or any other policies and address the social issues that we face. Climate change is actually a symptom of a failing political system led by politicians who are addicted to donations and their own self-interest above all else. They don't really care. They care more about their jobs, they care more about the opinion polls and their political perks than they do about you or I. Now, when we get around to climate change, the need to address climate change is actually well understood. It's obvious, and my credentials in this space are well known. We know we need to act fast and we need to act to reduce emissions, but the current government's policies won't do the job. We know what action we have to take, and we can take that whilst protecting our economy and our trade-exposed industries. We know we need to encourage other nations to act by taking action ourselves. And we understand the costs, and we understand that the transition to clean energy future is far less expensive than failing to act. So, with the greatest respect to our hard-working current member for Kooyong, I do question his moral compass that seems to spin between pleasing big donors and internal factions whilst sacrificing your future to protect his own. As Greta Thunberg said, it is a strange world. Today in politics, it seems the more skillful you are at dodging questions and the more devious you are with your answers, then the better you are as a politician. And I don't believe this electorate wants that. I think the voters of Kooyong are not fools and they want to stop the games. So our Member of Parliament sent to you all, at a cost of $100,000 of taxpayers, a letter designed to give you the impression that he cared about the environment, that climate change was real and that they were taking action, but it was just more spin. Let's not be fooled here. The Liberals proposed a climate solution package that is no solution at all. The letter was to give you an indication or an impression that national emissions were going down. They're not. They claim that Snowy is going to deliver 2,000 megawatts of renewable energy. It's not. It's going to take more energy to put it back up the hill than you're going to get coming down. They said they're going to develop an electric car strategy, and what do they do this week? They go out and attack Labor, who has actually announced an electric car strategy. He'll claim that there's record investment in renewables under this government, and it's only occurred as a result of the renewable energy target, a policy this government wanted to abolish. He'll then claim lots of climate action is being taken under this government in the name of the CEFC and ARENA, two entities that they tried to abolish twice. He will totally ignore the actual emissions, but instead references to the difference between forecast emissions and per capita emissions. Well, simply, if actual emissions are rising, you're not likely to hit a lower target, are you? So I offer a very clear alternative. As an independent here, I intend to represent you with integrity and with a vision for this country. I want an Australia that we can all be proud of. Instead, we've become a pariah in our treatment, in the way we treat asylum seekers, and now we're a shameful member of the axis of environmental evil. So ladies and gentlemen, I put it to you that whilst climate change is a critical issue and the appalling lack of progress on emissions is terrible, it is really a lack of integrity, because without integrity there is no trust, and without integrity there's no honesty, and we can have no leadership in this country, no leadership on climate change and no leadership as a nation. Climate change will never be addressed by this far-right Liberal Party because they're on the take of fossil donors. This government must be voted out, and past and present environment ministers that have failed to act with integrity and take meaningful action on climate change need to go with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Our next candidate is Dr. Angelina Zubac. Angelina is a strategic consultant with 30 years of consulting and lecturing experience. She's the National Convener of Strategic Management at the Australian Institute of Management and a Fellow at Bond University Business School. Angelina has worked with over 100 organisations, including 10 universities across Australia, has extensive experience in the energy sector, helping utilities develop and implement a range of business strategies. Welcome, Angelina.
The question for tonight was, is climate change the issue of the moment? And I'll say yes and no. Let's start with the no side. We basically have to govern for everybody. And the reality is some people have issues. You know, they I guess, dealing with homelessness, addiction, mental illness, cancer, educating themselves, buying a home. Okay, so climate change doesn't seem so real to them, okay? But as far as yes is concerned, we won't have anything to govern if we don't address climate change properly. Okay, so I'm saying yes and no, and I'm basically sort of saying that we need to actually have an integrated response. Just having two policies, infrastructure, integrity, okay, you know, climate change isn't enough. You actually have to look at the whole economy, and you have to look at all of the things that concern people. So with my campaign, I'm looking at a national agenda of 7 areas that need to be looked at, and also from a very strong climate change perspective. Okay, so that's productive and innovative workforce, globally competitive businesses, world-class educational and cultural institutions, preventative and accessible healthcare, peace of mind at every age, okay, so, you know, retirement from whatever age, fiscal responsibility, and infrastructure for the next 50 years. But that's in the context of an overall vision. Okay, I'm a strategist, okay, so we look at the long term, we look at also what is possible to implement. And that's within the vision of where we want to be in the future. So, yeah, in that context, I'm also looking at a very specific vision. So that's equality of opportunity and justice for all. Australia is a world leader in international human rights, okay, because I think we're really well placed to do that. Political and regulatory institutions electors can trust, because, you know, clearly we are very disappointed. I mean, the reason I jumped in the election in 2013 and 2016, because this is my 3rd time running, is that I could see disillusion. Okay, so, you know, I'm here again because, hey, I might win, I might not win, most likely not, but I feel I'm bringing policy to the fore that's really important. I also believe we need to have our coal-based industry devolved in a responsible manner. Okay, so really, you know, as a strategist, we know industries come to the end of their life cycle. And I really do believe this has happened with this particular industry. And we need to have a controlled approach to that. We need to have investment in renewable energy, which leads to lots of jobs, which I think is really important. Long-term investment in infrastructure, including an integrated approach to transport, the digital economy, energy, water networks. We want to also be a world leader in natural disaster risk management, because we can see now that the climate is leading to all sorts of extremes. And we really need to be prepared because, you know, hey, if we got rid of coal, there's fires all over the place. That's not good for the environment either. We also just want to make sure our educational institutions are ready to go as well, and we have the know-how to address our future. And I think we really do need to be more, I guess, visionary about how people's careers develop so that, you know, whatever they do, whether they're engineers or nurses or whatever, they understand what they need to achieve. But definitely in terms of having a career that is climate focused, we really want to have our educational institutions putting everybody in a position to have the knowledge that they need and the know-how to apply it. And of course, we want to do the basic things, like just make sure people don't have to worry about things like have a home in the future. And I assure you, if we don't address climate change and we have social and political disruption and all sorts of bad things happen, terrible recession globally or something like that, things like home ownership are going to be very, very difficult and, you know, the least of our concerns. So really, the whole idea is to link all of these things. And really, you know, that's what I'm going to focus on. So I'm going to focus on the areas where the vision is sort of really high up in the agenda. So really, disruption is happening. So I think we need to sort of get to it. Al Gore, a good friend of Barrry Jones, has done like a lot of people have done and convinced that everybody that climate change is real. But what we need to do now is understand that this also represents a great opportunity. I mean, it's a business opportunity. It's an opportunity for people to think about their careers differently. And it's an opportunity for Australians to come together in a way that they haven't done before. And of course, we do want to have integrated infrastructure. And what I really think we should be doing is things like what Nobel Prize winner Roma has suggested, and have things like provinces, or what I like to call regional corridors, where we're using new technology in regional areas which are reinvigorated and on the cutting edge to identify what we need in the future and roll those out in the city and do some serious retrofitting. So I offer an integrated vision and all about getting things done and staying in trouble a lot. That's what I plan to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelina. The final candidate here with us tonight is Minister Josh Frydenberg. Josh Frydenberg was elected to the Australian Parliament in 2010 as the member for Kooyong. He is the 7th person since Federation to hold this seat. His background includes law and economics degrees, and he has studied internationally at Oxford University. He worked as an advisor to Alexander Downer and John Howard, and is also a keen tennis player who represented Australia in 1991 and 1993. There is no explanation in the bio as to what happened in 1992. Everyone has an off year. In August 2018, he was appointed Treasurer of Australia and Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, having previously served as the Minister for the Environment and Energy, the Minister for Resources, Energy and Northern Australia, Assistant Treasurer and Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Welcome to the stage.
Well, can I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Last time I was here, before the last election, somebody charged the stage with a bucket of bleach. On a regular occasion, there is sit-ins in my office where the police are required, and just last week, my boards were defaced. I say that because, as was said at the onset, we can disagree on particular issues, but it's the constructive and respectful nature which is important as to how we conduct ourselves. And Carolyn and Lighter Footprints have always had an opening into my office, and I've enjoyed the interactions with them, and that is why I'm here today. Can I start by saying climate change is real? We need to be guided by the scientists, and we need to be part of a global solution. And that's why the coalition government signed and ratified the Paris Agreement, joining 195 countries that are signatories and 185 countries that ratified. We adopted a 26 to 28% reduction target by 2030 on 2005 levels, and we're on track to beat that, just as we have beaten our previous targets, namely the first Kyoto target and the 2020 target. For when we came to government, we were going to miss that target by around 755 million tonnes, and now we're on track to beat the 2020 target by 367 million tonnes. And what we are doing is putting in place a number of policies and strategies that is reducing our carbon footprint in a way that maintains the affordability and the reliability of our energy system, as well as reducing our overall emissions. In particular, the Emissions Reduction Fund has contracted for about 192 million tonnes of abatement at an average cost of about $12 a tonne, which is a very competitive price. We've also overseen the largest investment in renewables in Australia's history. In the last year, about 15 gigawatts of renewables has come in, worth about $20 billion. In terms of household solar, now 2 million homes have household solar, putting us as the highest on a per capita basis of anywhere in the world. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation, ARENA, and others have made hundreds of investments worth billions of dollars, issued billions of dollars of loans, and encouraged the commercialisation of new technology like microgrids and peer-to-peer lending and other developments in batteries and the like. We've also put in place a national energy productivity plan which aims to reduce our efficiency in our energy sector and the built environment by 40% by 2030, and we've helped lead the international action on the phasing out of HFCs ahead of the Montreal Protocol and by about 85% by 2036. Australia initiated and established the Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit, given 10% of the world's emissions are created by deforestation and working with other countries. We've also put in place the Blue Carbon Initiative, which is designed to protect our mangroves and our swamps because they're such an important carbon sink. And so there's a whole range of policies and initiatives, both domestically and internationally, which has brought us to where we are. And going forward, and I appreciate what Oliver said about putting out the Climate Solutions Package, because it is important for people to understand that $3.5 billion is being deployed to reduce emissions, including with an extension of the Emissions Reduction Fund, where more than 100 million tonnes will come from abatement that way, that we're putting $1.4 billion in this budget in Snowy 2.0. And Snowy 2.0 will be a big battery for the east coast of Australia, because when more wind and solar comes into the system, intermittent sources of power, you need storage and backup. And you can't do that with just household batteries. You need something very substantial, and this will provide 2,000 megawatts of new generation capacity and more than 350,000 megawatt hours of storage. This is a nation-building exercise, and this is very substantial. There's a whole host of other policies that we are rolling out, including support and grants for the solar panels for community groups and for small businesses, and as well as putting new plans in place and new standards for white goods and appliances. So, ladies and gentlemen, our emissions have come down by 11.5% from 2005 levels. We have met our first Kyoto target. We're on track to easily beat our 2020 target. We have to be part of a global solution, but we also have to bear in mind that that needs to be done in the most cost-effective and managed way. That is something which I think Australia has failed at in the past, but is now doing so much better. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, please once again thank our panellists for their contribution thus far. Democracy is definitely in action at the moment. I have over 220 questions that you have put forward. So strap in, guys. I promise we're not going to go through all of them, but it's giving me a really strong guide of the sorts of questions that are coming up for you as you've been hearing from our panellists this evening. So thank you very much for your contributions thus far. I'm going to start with a question focused on one of the hottest topics that is coming up a lot, and we knew this would be a hot topic tonight, and that is a question about the Adani coal mine. The Greens have stated publicly that you oppose the mine. The ALP have said that they do not support public money going to the Adani coal mine. However, the party has consistently failed to stop the mine from going ahead and has not declared that they will stop that mine from going ahead if elected. And Jana, your colleagues in Queensland have also consistently backed the proposal with approvals. The Morrison government is an active supporter of the proposed coal mine, having granted every approval that has come before them for the mine, and just this week provided a crucial groundwater management approval for the plan. Our independents, we haven't heard necessarily from each of you on this proposal. Can you please state for the audience whether you personally support the proposed Adani coal mine, how you would work to stop it from going ahead if you do not support it, and if you do not oppose the mine, on what grounds? And we'd like to hear from every member of the panel.
Unlike other political parties, we're allowed to talk about, and what we have said is that it needs to go through the rigorous approval processes, and the major approvals have already been given, both by federal and state governments. There was 180 conditions attached. The water approval was given. There's still 9 approvals still to go. And the most fundamental ones will be with the Queensland government. This has been subject to more conditions and more scrutiny than any other mine. It's about half the size of what was previously put forward. But Australia has a major resource sector. We have both coal, iron ore and other resources. And subject to the approvals being given based on the law, and in this case on the water issue, we took the advice of the CSIRO, of Geosciences Australia, and that is why it's gone to the next stage.
Well, as I said earlier, the coal industry is in decline. Okay, so we really need to take the view that the Adani mine is really not a good idea. I would like to sort of say, you know, it'd be easy to stop if it went ahead. Obviously, it would be very, very difficult, but I would definitely do everything possible to stop if it started. I agree with the IMF, major organisations. At this point in time, the coal is better left in the ground. And I'm just hopeful that things like the forward contracts that we're seeing around the world, 30 years in the future, have some industries that are really suffering in the future. They're related to coal, but also those already in the coal industry. So I'd like to stop it if it goes ahead.
Yep, thank you. This project totally lacks any form of social licence anymore. For a government that represents its people, and for a member who represents this audience to be continuing to support a project that its electors in this area do not support, is an extraordinary position for a local member to take. They're meant to represent you. I don't believe Kooyong wants this mine to proceed. The government has the power. It has the power to block this mine. There is no significant sovereign risk involved in this. The situation and the circumstances and the climate emergency that we face has changed from when this mine started its approval, and all of these approvals should be reassessed, taking into consideration our current climate situation.
The Adani mine is a really interesting test. The fact is that if you cannot control coal, you cannot control climate change. Coal is the biggest cause of climate change we know. Any government that is willing to support the creation of a new mine, a new coal mine, is plainly not serious about controlling climate change. And I don't know whether donations from fossil fuel have any effect on the grant of permission, but the Labor Party is going to have a test too, because the Queensland Labor Party is in a position to either grant or withhold the final approvals necessary for the mine to go ahead. It is very striking that the Adani mine was approved by the federal Liberal government just 2 days ago, and just the day before that, one of Josh's colleagues said, voters in Kooyong aren't going to sacrifice their franking credits for a mine in Queensland. Ultimately, rich people vote for money. That is a mark of the contempt with which the Liberal Party see this electorate of Kooyong, which has been held by Tories since Federation, and they can't even imagine the possibility that this electorate would turf out the present Treasurer of the country.
So just begin by saying that, like a lot of people in this room, I personally don't agree with Adani. I think it's important to have that on the record. And I think Labor's approach to the Adani mine has been a balanced one. Because I think there's been quite a few shadow ministers for Labor who have been on the record as saying they don't agree with it. They don't think it stacks up economically. They don't think it's in national interest for this to proceed. And I'm on their side of the Adani conversation there. And so for us, it's also important not to jump the gun here. And we need to make sure that, we're not in government, so we actually can't, do the things that, our colleague down the end here can. And we don't want to prejudge any particular outcome, because that could mean that it goes ahead anyway. And I think that's the outcome that everybody in this room can agree that we don't want. So we need to have a more balanced and measured approach to how we do it. Like I said, I don't personally agree with it, but I agree that we need to actually have a bit more of a considered and measured approach to it and actually follow the law, and that's what we're committed to doing.
Let me reinforce why I'm standing as an independent. Mr. Thodey, who's the head of CSIRO, Josh, I don't know whether you heard his Manning Clark lecture this week. It's been on 2 or 3 times. I don't think he would agree with your logic about Adani. But the sleeper is not just Adani. There are, is it 8 or 9 coal mines proposed for the Galilee Basin? And in a sense, it's unfortunate that poor Mr. Adani is taking all the flack. But what about Gina Reinhardt and all of the others who are ready to go in that basin area? Secondly, we have, you're not allowed to use words here on Facebook, are we? No, right. We have been fed a load of misinformation on Adani, and Josh, you know that, and that's unfortunate. I find it difficult because my issue is not with you personally, but how can you simply halve a project and then still not demand another environmental effects approach to it? That's the field I work in. Any other company I know who halved their project would have to start from scratch and do it again. Now, you talk about balance. I'm not a good dancer, but this is Labor. jumping from one foot to another about Adani, and they keep doing it all of the time. And so I have no confidence that Labor will be able to work it out either. Talk about sovereign risk. The example which affected people here, the State Liberal Party secretly and dishonestly signed a letter just before the election on the East-West link, and it cost everyone in this place here $1 billion. Thank you very much. So the idea that we get put off by sovereign bluff is just not on the cards for me.
Thank you. As I'm going through and scrolling through the questions, I've noted quite a number have come in from young people who are with us here in the audience tonight. I think the youngest I've noticed is from a 10-year-old. I've seen a couple of questions in relation to the climate strikes, and this was raised with me by a member of the audience earlier. One question that has come through: would you allow your own child to go to the climate strikes? And an extension of that, do you believe, as a candidate and politician, you are doing enough to lead on climate change?
I would not want them to go and strike, but I said on Q&A the other night, because I got the same question, I think, I said, I understand people's passion about the environment. We all want to protect the commons, and we all recognise the importance of protecting it for future generations. But the second part of your question is, do we think we're doing enough? Well, we can only do enough as a global community. That's the point.
The question, just to be clear, and the question that I will ask for everyone is, are you as a candidate or a politician doing enough to lead on climate change?
I believe that our targets are reasonable, on a per capita and a GDP basis are ambitious, and that we are doing things that will meet and beat those targets, whereas other countries are not.
Well, I don't have children, but if I did, I would say, yeah, go for it. I really think it is important for young people to strike, particularly if they don't think this generation is doing enough. Indeed, everyone in this room remembers the 70s, 60s. I can see there's actually quite a lot of older people here. I know there are young people. But it was a time where, you know, standing up and doing something was really important. Look, I think I'm doing enough because, hey, I teach at university and I teach sustainable business development and innovation, and we are educating engineers and other people to responsibly change products, services, infrastructure. And also, I have jumped in the election now for the third time. And that's against the odds, where I don't have a huge budget. So I feel I'm doing enough, and I'm committed to focusing on what I do really well, which is, if I win, implementing, getting stuff done. That's what I do. Thanks.
Well, I thoroughly support the strike. If parents are unprepared to act, then their children have the right to act, as they will have the consequences for our failures. In relation to, am I doing enough? Well, my employer didn't think that standing against the Treasurer was a particularly good idea, so I have plenty of time on my hands. And I undertook at Christmas, talking to people, as a result of this climate emergency, that those people should stare their children in the face and say, this year, you must do everything within your power to actually address climate change. Now, I'm lucky, I have experience in this space, and I have a bit of a political pedigree from my father, and so I've decided that all I can do now, because the economics are clear, business isn't moving fast enough, this has to be led through government policy, and this government is failing miserably, that there is nothing more than I can do than do everything that I can do to seek your support to be elected.
If my daughter was still at school, I would urge her to join the student strike. I think it is very significant that school children are going on strike because they know that it is their future which hangs in the balance and depends on politicians doing the right thing to recognise and take active steps against climate change. And if I were elected, I would use whatever powers I had to cancel the Adani contract. Now, people talk about sovereign risk. Sovereign risk is a meaningless expression as a matter of law, and I would say if there's a contract which Adani can enforce, I would hold to account those members of the outgoing Liberal government who signed the contract and committed the government.
So in answer to the first question, would I let my son? Absolutely. I was there in support of the school strike when they were marching to have their voices heard, and I thought it was incredible. The next generation of leaders that this country has is absolutely inspirational. I think there are lots of people who should sit up and listen to what these young people have to say, including in Canberra. And am I doing enough? I mean, I hope so. I think I've joined a party, put my hand up to represent a party in this seat that's got a plan to tackle climate change and can form government to actually deliver it. So that's a part of what I hope we can do. And I think that there's always more to be done. I think it's silly to get up here and say we're absolutely doing our best and there's no more that we could do, because I think that's unrealistic. I think there's absolutely more that we can be doing every day and in all of our thinking to do more to tackle climate change. Absolutely.
Two things. Ross and I have 6 grandchildren. We went in on the train to I don't like using the word strike, there's a better word for it. It's really taking responsibility. The trains were packed with enthusiastic young people and enthusiastic old people, and it was a damn sight more fun than watching Q&A, I'd have to say, Josh.
I'm being honest.
Nothing personal, of course. But secondly, a 12-year-old who lives in Canberra doing a project on the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, appeared before a Senate committee. He was brilliant. An 80-year-old who's actually staying with me tonight is going to ask the question, I told you, Bill, this is a serious problem. Just stop mining coal and gas. And he's going to ask me tomorrow morning, so did you get it stopped?
Yes.
To the independents on the panel, we've seen a rise of independents across Australia in recent years. And we have seen that independents can use their power for great leverage to support climate action or to cause great damage on climate policy. If there were a hung parliament, who would you support if you were elected? And how would you use your leverage as an MP to secure outcomes for climate action?
Oh, okay, well, I'll go first. Look, as far as preferencing is concerned in this election, I've got Labor as my first preference, and that's because I think they're going to win. I also think Jana would be a good alternative if you don't vote for me, okay? I think she'd grow into the role. I'm just being honest. I'm just telling you how the ballot's going to look. Oh, do you want to just
if you were elected, how would you use your leverage to secure?
Oh, okay. So as I said, I'd be supporting obviously whoever won, but definitely I wouldn't be just saying yes. Okay. The whole idea is to get things done and be decisive, and this is what I've seen has been missing. And as a strategist, I can just sort of see that everything's fragmented. And, it's all about polls and, knee-jerk reaction and so forth. I'd be there making sure that strategic foresight, the vision for the future holds together and providing input about making things better. So, as I said, at this point in time, obviously whoever wins, I'm betting Labor is going to do quite well in this election. So that's how I'm preferencing. Okay?
Look. In relation to the initial question, for me, politics needs to be stable. So whichever party wins the majority will have my support in terms of guaranteeing supply. But in relation to climate action, I will be representing this seat, and the views of this seat in relation to the need for climate action and pushing policies which are consistent with that. I've had experience, obviously, having been subject to numerous attempts by the government to abolish the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which I was the CEO of, and so I have very good relationships on all sides of government. And therefore, I believe as an independent, I will be able to carry a significant amount of influence in the House as a result of my previous relationships and as a result of being an honest broker in relation to matters such as these. I have particular experience here, and I think it will be useful for the public to have an independent talk to them about this transition that we need to undertake. An independent who is not representing one side or the other, but an independent who's representing the people.
I mentioned the head of CSIRO before, David Thodey. He also spoke about the Westminster system, and this is not a lecture about how it works, but he pointed out that the real Westminster tradition rather than the system, and the only thing we have in similarities here is the colour of the seats, the green seats and the red seats, the rest is pretty different. But the three parties, government, the parliament and the people. And I would say this, that the government has trivialised climate change, and that's happened over now a decade. And quite frankly, Josh, the throwing around that bit of coal, I'm sorry I had to include that photo of you there, but that is really, that's the sort of stuff I would speak very harshly to about my children, and my grandchildren. The Parliament has struggled with a rational debate over at least a decade, much more than that. And therefore my approach would be to look at, instead of having this adversarial approach between parties, which quite frankly is just seriously boring amongst other things, to look much more at a collaboration. I seldom, being probably a pacifist, use the term war, but in fact there needs to be that sort of approach. This is a very serious issue. And the last comment I'd make is that the third part of Thodey's comment, the people, hey, that's us, and that's why there's 650 people here tonight.
Julian Burnside, the Greens have what many would see as the most progressive climate policy of the parties that are here today. But in the past, the Greens have not necessarily always used their power in ways that some people would think have achieved the best outcomes. Some have questioned the opposition to the CPRS, and in the last week, Richard Di Natale was suggesting that you may not support elements of the ALP's climate package if they were elected to government. Why should the people of Kooyong elect you as their representative to lead them?
I'm very glad someone raised the question of the CPRS. The CPRS was a hopeless scheme. It did not offer any emission reductions until 2035. Okay, it was not a good scheme. People criticised the Greens for opposing the CPRS, saying that they're making the perfect the enemy of the good. In fact, by opposing the CPRS, the Greens made the rubbish the enemy of the good. The CPRS was not a good system, and a much better system, the carbon price, was introduced subsequently because the CPRS failed. That, in my view, is a clear illustration of the way the Greens can and will and have used their position in the crossbench to achieve results that are worthwhile. And whilst I mention that, I should also add, don't forget that it was the Greens that pushed for the marriage equality debate and got it. Without the Greens, you wouldn't have had that. Don't forget that the Greens, against the opposition of the Liberal Party and the Labor Party earlier, managed to get a Royal Commission into the banking industry. You wouldn't have had that. The fact is that the Greens have repeatedly used their power on the crossbench to achieve results that Australia needs.
Jana, the ALP, based on the policy announced thus far, has a stronger policy on climate change than the Liberal Party. Yet we know even the targets announced by the ALP are not in line with what the science says is necessary to address climate change. We also know that the ALP has buckled under fierce lobbying from big polluters in the past. Why should the people of Kooyong elect you to represent them and lead on this issue?
Because I am confident that I will have colleagues beside me, if I'm lucky enough to be elected in May, who share the same values that I do and share the same passion and drive to actually tackle climate change head on. And I think the more people who share those views in the Labor Party, the more chance we've got of actually voting on those things and actually getting the outcomes that we want in this electorate and for the country. So we need more like-minded people like me in the Labor Party to actually push these things internally. And that's why I think you actually need to have, you know, if Labor's successful in May, I hope that I'm a part of the caucus that actually forms government. And I think when you have people in the caucus having those conversations and influencing the people that need to be influenced, they can actually create the change.
Thank you. Mr. Frydenberg, pollution has been steadily increasing since you were elected to government, and many in your party are actively opposed to serious action on climate change. You were the Minister for Environment and Energy at the time where Scott Morrison bandied about a lump of coal on the floor of Parliament, and we've seen a photograph of you with that coal. You were also the Energy and Environment Minister responsible for trying to move the National Energy Guarantee through your party, and with division that ultimately brought down Malcolm Turnbull's Prime Ministership. Why should the people of Kooyong elect you to represent them and lead on this issue?
Well, obviously, no one was more disappointed than I was that the National Energy Guarantee didn't develop into becoming a policy. But it is ironic that at the time that I was pushing it forward, that Bill Shorten described it as a Frankenstein policy, and now he seems to have adopted it. The reality is that our energy market is in enormous transition. About 10 coal-fired power stations have closed in the last 5 to 8 years, and the cost curve of renewables has steadily come down. But when you've seen, and Hazelwood was an old and a dirty brown coal-fired power station, which supplied just over 20% of Victoria's energy supply. When that closed, we saw a wholesale spike in the price here of about 80%. When Northern Power Station in South Australia closed, the last of the coal-fired power stations in South Australia, they also saw the wholesale energy price go up by about 80%. So the reality is, unless you manage the transition, the people who pay for it are the workers, because it hurts our competitiveness, but also those particularly on low income earners, because the bottom 20% of income earners spend 5 times as much on their disposable income of energy than the top 20%. So I am working with my colleagues, no longer the Energy Minister, but I'm working with my colleagues to smooth the transition and to ensure that we meet our international commitments. But Australia needs to be part of a global effort. That's why I supported the signing and the ratification of Paris, and that's why I've supported the work that we've done, whether it's through climate development assistance for countries, particularly the Pacific in our region, or the pursuit of the phasing out of HFCs, or the Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit, and a whole host of other measures globally, so that we are part of a global solution.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at time, so I would ask you once again to thank our panellists for their contribution and discussion this evening. I note that in the time that we have been up here, the questions that you have sent through have actually increased from 220 to 260, which indicates some really enthusiastic people who thought we could fit in those extra 40 questions. I understand that those questions are available on Slido, and I understand Carolyn will make them available. Please, if you haven't had a look, take a look and see what your friends and neighbours and colleagues are asking of our candidates. We have questions about nuclear energy, about forestry, about farming practices, about the Paris Agreement, and we apologise that we weren't able to get to those, but I believe a number of the candidates will be available in the next room shortly. So thank you once again.
Thank you for a very interesting panel. We could go on all night. Obviously, we tried to keep this so that you got a flavour of the issues that we're all concerned about. I want to thank the panel again, and our moderator, who did a fantastic job in making this thing work tonight. We have a little Prezi, which is our wind wine, our 100% wind-powered wine. It's not a great gift, but it's all right. And we're going to give one of these each, and the panel will then move to the chandelier room. I hope most of them will stay. I'm not sure. We'll see how that goes. But they will be available for you. And there, Josh has to go. So thank you. I particularly want to thank Josh for being part of it. I'll give him his wind wine and he will make his way out. But the others will be in the chandelier room. What I suggest is that they take the wine and go. Now, just before you leave, please, just one moment, I just wanted to explain a couple of the things for you to do. We have been exposed to a lot of information tonight, and part of the issue is the choice that we're led to. We want to make a noise about climate in Kooyong. This is the start of it, the start of day one on the campaign. Fancy being able to choose this. 6 months ago we chose this date, and we got it spot on. We would like you to be involved in making climate the issue in this electorate. Make people think about it. Remember what you heard tonight, and we've got ways of doing that in the electorate. Little businesses of knocking on doors and speaking on phones and talking to people in the street, putting a fence sign up. We've got fence signs, and they're out the back. It's all part of a campaign to raise climate. It is not candidate supportive as such. It simply says, think about climate as an issue and take with you this potential of having a neighbour say, what on earth are you doing that for? And take the opportunity to talk about it. So what I'm hoping that you will do is talk to your candidates and support them, and take something away which is a general climate action piece of work. You've got a little thing on your seat which says, I'll volunteer to help. We've got scorecards which are really useful piece of information to put out on polling day. How are we going to do that? We need your hands to help us do that. So to make this impact so that no matter what the outcome, there is an acknowledgement that climate was the issue in Kooyong is in your hands. So we're passing this banner on to you tonight. So thank you, everybody. There will be stalls in the foyer to pick things up, and there's candidates in the chandelier room. So thank you so much. We'll see you later.